This is our very first Taco Tuesday where we discuss really, and the only thing we're going to discuss is the failures, the chickening out of our punk ass POTUS, DJT, old Donnie Trump himself. Now, for those of you who've tuned in on a live with me before, I'm a little more somber. I'm a little more reserved. What's up, Kat? How you doing? But on Taco Tuesday, oh no, we're going to let things fly. Because again, everything here is about Trump always chickens out. We're going to throw a little bit of highbrow academia kind of stuff in here, but we're also going to keep it raucous because, again, we're talking about our punk ass POTUS. Yeah. Our POS POTUS, if you will, Donald J. Trump. All right. And everything on this episode is going to be about failures on the international scene. It may have to go into a two-parter because, oh dear Lord, there are just a lot of them. I mean, a lot. So before we begin, let's check in with our chickens. How you doing there, Taco? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. We got the chickens. They've come home to roost, and Donald Trump's about to find out what that phrase actually means. So, what are we doing when we're talking about international chickening out? Which Trump's doing that a lot lately. It may not seem like it because of all this tough talk that our corporate media is just, pushing out. Well, his raising tariffs and lowering tariffs and raising tariffs, because that's how the TACO acronym came out, first of all. They use it on Wall Street to talk, for those of you who are not familiar about the acronym TACO. And it stands for Trump always chickens out. Now, for the Wall Street investors who basically invest in the Dow Jones, once he lowers the tariffs, the Dow drops, they buy the dip, i.e. after it dips down. And then of course he, comes to his senses. That's, after he's done his tough talk, and then the Dow goes back up and then they sell off. And that's kind of where that started, right? Now, is that good for us as Americans consumers? Absolutely not. No. And just like those chickens we heard, all that's going to come home to roost. And I'm going to tell you why. But first, we've really got to drill down into this myth that Donald Trump is a businessman, right? And he's even good at business. Because being good at business and being good at trade, especially international trade or trade between nation states, that's totally different. So let's bust out, and who are we exactly dealing with here, right? I mean, most of us think that Trump is an idiot. I mean, if you're one of the few MAGA that wandered in here and like, well, wait a minute, you can't be doing insulting. No. There's going to be no both sides in this on Taco Tuesday. Absolutely not. We're going straight at old DJT. Okay, so just be prepared for that. So, who is Donald Trump exactly? What does he really know about business? Well, turns out not much, about as much as you'd expect. And why can I say that? Let's look at what he's done over the course of his life, besides being a con man. At best, he's a real estate hustler, specifically in sort of bigger commercial projects like big buildings that he can slap his name on, that he just kind of does remodeling, or, casinos, specifically in Atlantic City. So really, it's important to put that in context because we have to know exactly what kind of guy we're dealing with and what he really knows in the people he chooses to surround himself with. So being a real estate hustler, and that's really being charitable at this point. I mean, really, he's just a con man and a grifter. But let's just say he's a real estate hustler. With real estate, it's pretty much a one-shot deal, right? You get a property and you flip it, you fix it up, whatever. You hope to make a profit and you sell it. And you keep looking for the seller to buy it. Maybe you have a good deal and you get a seller right away, or maybe you have to make it work with someone else, or maybe, something, maybe you find a sucker and you dump it off. But once the deal is done, it's done. That's it. That's not how trade agreements work. Trade agreements are a legal framework that is backed up by international agreements that is both, it's a compromise between two countries. It's kind of beneficial and it's not kind of beneficial. Both countries get something they want and they have to give up something they didn't want to give up. That's kind of how trade works. That's how trade has always worked. So the problem with Donald Trump is, even in his business acumen, which, if you even grant him that, is all wrong for international trade. All of it. It doesn't work. So that's problem number one. Problem number two, he hasn't really been a businessman except for just being a con artist on the political scene for really a long time. I mean, unfortunately, that producer of Survivor, I'm trying to remember his name, made him a household name with The Apprentice. So basically, everything was done for him. Now, he learned a lot from being on that show, in the sense of, how do you move a populace? How do you have something that's TV ready? All that kind of stuff, right? So he understands how to play the media cycle, where it's day to day to day. What's up, Dana? How you doing? Day to day to day, all that good stuff. But he doesn't understand, again, trade agreements that can take years to put into effect. So what we're dealing with is someone that has no concept of international trade, or is taking a playbook out of the 80s from stuff that he heard somebody probably say at a party that he thought would be great, and turned out it's full of crap, right? That's who we have right now in the POTUS. Someone who's just woefully inept and woefully ignorant, and is surrounding himself with ignorant people. So what has that led to? Ooh, it has led to a lot of failure on the international scene. And part of it is because of how this guy's mentality comes from. That's why I went over this, right? Mark Burnett, there you go. Dana got it. He was the Survivor producer. So you got to remember, Donald Trump's patience, his attention span, his acumen, his everything is like 5 minutes. That's as far as it goes. That's not going to get you very far in international trade. That's not going to get you very far in any kind of international diplomacy. That kind of stuff takes patience and time. One thing, unfortunately, that our 24-hour news cycle, and the thing that Donald Trump is so good at manipulating, can't stand. That's why they didn't like Joe Biden, because Joe Biden stuff, legislation, all these things that you need, takes time. You can't just send out a tweet or bully someone and then, come on, make the deal. Come on, do this. Come on. No, it doesn't work like that. Not even close. And when you do that, you run into all kinds of problems. So what things has Trump done? Well, let's start with Ukraine and let's go from there. So Ukraine, I'll back this up to just recently. I won't even go back into the campaign where he said, I'll go ahead and I'll make peace between Russia and Ukraine on day one. I'll just make it with a phone call. Okay. Or, how we need to leave NATO and all these other foolish things he said. They're going to play it. They're going to play a factor for sure. But let's back up to that White House visit, knowing with what we know now and back then, when Zelensky came to the White House looking like he just walked off a battlefield, which optics-wise is amazing. And there he is sitting in the office, and he's getting grilled for the dumbest things ever. You're not wearing a suit, which was by Marjorie Taylor Greene's little beau, or, her CrossFit buddy, whatever. And I think JD Vance said, "You didn't say thank you." Like he's being excused from the kids' table, at Thanksgiving dinner. And yeah, and I'm getting to that, PJ. Is like, and then there's Trump telling him, "You don't have the cards. You don't have the cards." When behind the scenes, the Ukrainians were planning the last, like getting towards the final phase of implementation of something called Operation Spiderweb, which very well may go down in history as one of the greatest military raids operations in modern warfare. And I'm not being verbose, I'm not being hyperbolic or grant I mean it is. Like when you're talking about economy of scale in terms of what the Ukrainians had and what they were able to do with it against taking out over a third of the Russian nuclear fleet, mind blowing, mind blowing. And we're not talking about air raids with aircraft. We're not, that, that set off, like where they had massive casualties. We're not, some kind of like do or die suicide event kind of thing, No, it was just little drones that just popped out of some containers and dropped some bombs and wiped out a fleet that was parked. That's it. And it's amazing. It's amazing. Now I know a lot of people are kind of like, some people have been like, "Oh, this is terrifying. It's changed warfare." It's like, well, one, warfare is always changing. And two, yeah, there's all if you don't have something secured, it's always vulnerable to attack. Because how and it's so how do you protect against that? Well, you have allies, and you don't be an asshole to the rest of the world. It's really that simple, you know? Being bellicose and invading other countries and pissing the rest of the world off. Yeah, well, then you tend to have people that want to be like, you know what? Yeah, I want to take a shot at them. Because here's the problem. If, say, someone were to do that to us, oh, we'd find out and there'd be retaliation. That's the problem. It's the retaliation part. But Russia's already invading Ukraine. So they got nothing to lose, right? Except, so this is it. But here's the thing. Getting back to Trump with his no cards. Because again, how did Trump chicken out? Because again, we're doing taco, so we got to have Trump chickening out. So, first of all, Trump tried to bully Ukraine into accepting a horrible peace process. And Zelensky just used Trump's bravado as a pretext to honestly lull the Russians into a sleep, man. That's what it's looking like more and more. I remember when Vladimir decided they were going to attack Kursk. And for those of you who don't know, Kursk for the Russians is a huge deal. There was a massive tank battle against the Nazis in World War II at Kursk. And it turned the tide of the Eastern Front. It was the thing that started basically the long retreat and fallback for the Nazis, and ultimately led to the Soviets, to Russia taking Berlin. And so, and for if there's any doubt in terms of men and materiel, while the United States absolutely did its part in terms of like, battlefield casualties and blood and armored divisions, the Soviets won World War II. They contributed the most of it. Now, again, we absolutely helped the rest of the world, right? And but for the Russians, this is the reason I'm saying that is for the Russians, Kursk is a huge, huge deal. That's why they wanted it. That's why they fought so hard to get into Kursk. And ultimately, in May, it cost them 35,000 casualties. And I think a lot of that was spurred on by two factors. Is one, Putin was desperate to push as hard as he could in these final moments to get what he perceived as a weakened Ukraine, in a large part thanks to Trump, because it looked like to me, to the rest of the world, that Ukrainians were being propped up solely almost by the United States, which wasn't true, right? And you had the EU, and you had some of those powers starting to push a little bit more for support on the Ukrainian side. But there was still, even at these late hours, that there was some hope that someone would get with the Americans, get with Trump or whatever, and he would come in on the side of the Ukrainians finally and uphold NATO. Because, I mean, we're talking about a dismantling of the world order since World War II. And that just doesn't happen. And we're talking about that happening in the span of less than 6 months, which is astounding. Like that's just mind blowing. So I understand why it's like, come on, come on, come on, like do what you're supposed to do. Come on. Yeah. No. So Trump dropped the ball there. I think he helped lull Vladimir into a false sense of security. Oh, we got Trump under our thumb. He ain't gonna help the Ukrainians out. Oh yeah, and then of course Pete Hegseth came out and said, "Oh, we're not sharing. We're not going to be you know protecting their cybersecurity anymore. We're not going to fold that on the Ukrainians and protect them." So, meh. Okay, that's great. You know, so all these things, especially with Zelensky going to Turkey and, hey, I'm here for the peace process. Putin's not. And at the time, that looked like an optics kind of thing, right? Because again, the Ukrainians just a month ago, yeah, they made the Russians pay for all this land that they grabbed, which is, I think, 100 square kilometers, which sounds like a lot, but it's debatable. Um, because honestly, it doesn't really matter once the peace process starts what lands get changed. Nobody, I mean, thought that there would be a bold raid on that scale. It just, the logistics involved in that, I mean, are just astounding. Just to coordinate it. And not only that, to keep it quiet. And frankly, I mean, somebody's going to go back and look at the timeline. If you line up of all of Donald Trump's moves in trying to isolate Ukraine and force them to the Russian table, and while Russia's just violating ceasefire after ceasefire after ceasefire, it really looks like Ukraine's on the ropes. That they really don't have any cards left to play. And there they go. I mean, you couldn't have scripted this better. And a lot of that's thanks to Donald Trump, inadvertently. He's the worst friend the Russians ever had, to be honest. I mean, it's so Trump, when he had the opportunity to force Vladimir to the table, to push and get Russia to basically save their own ass, he didn't do it. In fact, his most recent move was, we're not going to negotiate. We're not going to negotiate peace. We're going to let the Ukrainians solve it themselves. Okay. So I don't think they're having a hard time right now. I think they're okay. Yeah, they got a long way to go, but man, you're starting to see moves now in the EU with Germany's making a play, putting a brigade in Lithuania. In fact, their chancellor said, or I think their defense minister said, that basically Ukraine's assured to come in NATO after all this is said and done. They're coming in. Both France and now the UK are saying they want to lead the way. And so is Canada, frankly. Canada now is, they said they're going to make their military forces completely sovereign. What that means is away from the United States umbrella by July 1st. In fact, Prime Minister Carney signed a defense agreement for manufacturing and building up Canada's military by $1.2 trillion. And a lot of that's going to be built in Canada, which means jobs. So this little last bluster he did, where he's like, if you become the 51st state, you could be under our golden dome, which to me sounds like some, like, I don't even want to get into it. It sounds like a urinal fetish to me. The golden dome. Like, oh, dear God. Why does everything got to be golden with this jerk? Like, seriously, man. Like, everything is either big or beautiful or golden. Like, get a thesaurus, man. Get some synonyms, dude. Like, really. Like, get more than 5. Golden dome. Oh, it's called NORAD, you idiot. Yeah, that's right. Sure, he is an asshole. So, but anyway, like, I digress. He's so yeah, Canada's going its own way. And I tell you what, they're right that there's going to be a new hegemonic world order, which is Russia, China, and the US. I don't think so, bro. I think it's going to be the EU, Canada, and the UK if they don't go back into the EU. I think that's the new world order. And I think Ukraine is going to be part of not only the EU, but NATO. Which I honestly look for Trump to do another, chicken shit move and leave NATO at some point when they find out they don't really need him. Because this weekend, Pete Hegseth was at ISS, the Institute for Strategic Studies. And my God, he read like a speech that sounded like, ChatGPT wrote about it. China is a threat. They seek hegemonic power in Asia. Yeah, no shit. That's pretty much how it's been since China existed. I mean, that's pretty much what we're doing. Every power seeks hegemonic, security or whatever. For us, we called it under Teddy Roosevelt, he called it the big stick diplomacy. It was in the Caribbean. Speak softly and carry a big stick. If you remember that from your history class. All superpowers, all major powers. Oh, sorry. Too much moving around. Keep hitting the desk. All major powers seek hegemonic power. Now, for those of you who don't know what that means, is like basically what it means is you've got one major power. They tend to want to bring in other smaller nations sort of under that umbrella, right? I mean, Rome, they called it the client states or vassal states. It's just kind of how like governments work. And, it's the same thing with alliances. And those can take in various forms and like how that alliance works, whether it's more economic and beneficial. China's role in their hegemonic power seems to be more economic, less military. There's some military, but we're more the military adventurist power. Some and a lot of economic, but most of ours was finance and the dollar. So we had like a really strong, robust economy that we benefited from for damn near 60 years or more from the post-World War II, because we were really the only major power left standing. We didn't have, besides the bombing at Pearl Harbor in the continental United States, the war didn't touch our shores. So all our factories, all that stuff was still left. Whereas it took Europe decades to kind of rebuild itself. So, and by that point, we were so powerful that, yeah, it was just hard to catch up to us. But politicians have done a great job letting them do it. And that's kind of what we're seeing now. So that brings us to the second part of this taco, and that's the Trump tariffs and all the problems that's creating. Because the thing is, the military power and the economic power tend to go hand in hand. Not always, but they tend to go hand in hand, right? So, again, because of his short attention span and his problems there, what's happened is we have because Trump only knows one way, which is bluster and bullying and whining and complaining when his bullying doesn't work. All you got to do is, as people figured out, you just got to wait him out. That's it. He'll get bored and try to capitulate because, again, Trump is not trying to win anything for America. Like, he stopped trying. Like, it's just for him. It's not for us. It's not for our nation. It's for him. What can he get out of it? Something that just dropped recently, and I hope it's true. I don't know. Like, I want to see if this happens. So supposedly Qatar has been mad, because they've been besmirched so much in the media that they said they're not going to deliver the plane unless Trump admits that he basically bullied them into giving it to him as a gift because they wanted to sell it originally. And so unless Trump admits that he said basically push them to give it to him personally as a gift, they're not going to deliver it. Oh, I hope that's true. I really hope that's true. Uh, I mean, you got to laugh at some of this stuff, right? No, I don't think they delivered it yet. I mean, I think they're going to make delivery. And I mean, if they had delivered it, it would be all over the news. Trump would be there to look at it, and he'd point out all the gold and, wow, isn't this great? Look what I did for America, i.e., me. So I don't think they've delivered it yet. And the corporate media would be fawning all over it. They'd be like, "Oh my God, it's a golden aircraft! Look," whatever. But this goes back to trade and what we've done to our soft power, right? And so for those of you who don't understand, so the difference between hard power and soft power when you're talking in foreign policy, right? So setting up let's say the invasion of we go into Afghanistan, we're hunting Osama bin Laden, we're combating Al Qaeda, the global war on terror. That's an example of hard power, right? What George W. Bush called cowboy diplomacy. That's the actual sending in troops, boots on the ground, guns, that's hard power. Soft power is a lot of what China practices, and that's what we practice in other arenas. That's your economic power. That's also your diplomacy. So like USAID is a great example of soft power. Going into a country and helping eradicate disease, hunger, setting up hospitals, building infrastructure. That's all examples of soft power. And those are way more effective historically than hard power. I mean, obviously, because nobody likes to be pushed around. And two, it's a hell of a lot harder to change a culture. I mean, look at the way we act. So it's, you can make the argument that we haven't really changed. MAGA is just the logical conclusion of a lot of this horrible stuff that was baked in to the American experiment, like racism, misogyny, basically the white patriarchy. So, I apologize. It's I got to do these sniffles, man. I've been battling like a cold and stuff for past 3 days. And so I'm at the tail end of it finally. So that's nice. But the thing about soft power is it's, again, because it's soft, you can't go in all bluster and saber rattling and like Trump likes to do, right? I don't know if you guys remember, there's this famous moment. I think it was when he was at the G7 in his first term where all these world leaders, they're in like an auditorium and they're taking a picture. And of course, Trump just he pushes through and he's all, "Argh," and then he fixes his suit and buttons it up. And then, he's, "Argh," and he likes because he has to get his picture taken, because again, it can't be just like, in your mind, but oh, I'm good, man. I'll wait. And then in your mind, you're saying, I'm president of the United States, bro. That's fine. I'm good. You know, like we run the free world. I can wait. And they'll coming back. They'll come back around. He doesn't have that in him. Biden did, but that's why like Biden had a lot of world leaders like Biden. You know, so but this kind of goes hand in hand with trade, especially so. I'll give you a recent example. So reportedly now, Xi Jinping of China, the Chinese premier, he's in no hurry to meet with Trump. And frankly, like he wants assurances what their meeting's going to be about on the record, because as he stated, Trump lies about even having a phone call with him. And he's like, no, I had to set the record straight on that. And, you lied about that. So we can't have that again, dude. And China, who's now ready for this one, is they're playing hardball with their soft power, especially with our farmers. And it's not working out well for us. That's why Trump, you're seeing like him go to Pittsburgh and talk about, I'm going to bring back American steel and I'm going to go from 25% to 50% on aluminum. Man, even though the court said, no, dude, that's not your role. You can't just arbitrarily raise tariffs. It's against, yeah, no. But he's going to keep doing it. And, because that, again, it's just for the cameras. It doesn't mean anything. However, that does have an impact on the world stage. Because again, it's not just, oh, that's just Donald. Oh, that's just him being who he is. No, that's the president of the United States. And while these other countries are not going to necessarily wait around for that, they're going to use it now to their advantage. They're like, oh, okay. We have our own politicians that have wanted to cut America out, but it was way too risky. Like it would have been very painful and our populace would have voted us out of office. But well, hell, if it's painful now, we got a built-in excuse because they hate this fool more than they hate the pain. And we can blame him. Yeah. So I think he'll absolutely have to make appearances to keep it up. I mean, I think when it starts to unravel, I think he's really going to start chickening out. He's going to get really desperate. China knows it has a winning hand, and this thing on Russia. Oh man, that couldn't have gone better for them. They're like, what? Russia got knocked down a peg. Ooh, isn't that great for us? Oh, fantastic. I'll give you kind of a small example of how this is subtly changing thing, right? When I was at ETSU, my thesis advisor, and I did my thesis on China, uh, uh, on the open door with Teddy Roosevelt and Taft, and our kind of first failures in China. Let me put it this way: every time we go into China and try to push them around, it never works out well for us. It, historically in the U.S., never does. It's no. Britain's has had better success historically there. It's been horrible, but yeah, they've done a little bit better. I mean, it tends to happen that way when you have like modern guns in the late 19th century, and you float them down the the Yellow River, and just start blasting, medieval type cities with stone, and go, hey, you don't open up this trade and give us favorable deals. We're just gonna blow up your whole city. And that's pretty much what they did. So, you know, but um, for us, like with the thing with Trump, um, where he's messed up with this in China, okay, is they can afford to wait. They hold the cards with this stuff. And the problem he's had is he's had these tariffs. One, he promised that there would be a golden age. Even at the best case scenario, if you were trying to bring back manufacturing, a more viable strategy should have been pretty much what Biden was doing. You target specific industries that can come back, that you could compete in whatever the next iteration is going to be. So, like semiconductors, they're probably not going anywhere. Even with AI, you're still going to need that stuff in tech. So, from you can say, well, from a strategic perspective, from national security perspective, we need to have more manufacturing here. Okay, you support that industry with subsidies. You encourage people to come here. You grant them tax breaks, et cetera, et cetera. You set up schools. You set up a whole infrastructure for that. AI facilities, which although it's an unproven tech, we don't know where it's going to go. So, okay, but you can, other countries are dumping a lot of money into it. Let's dump into it. You got to build the facility. You got to try to bring it up to code. You've got to try to, create technology that's not as, pollutant, um, you know, and so that could lead to other technologies, right? That help us out in terms of, not just AI, but in support of AI. I'll give you an example. So the reason we have miniaturization in computers wasn't because the free market all of a sudden one day decided we need to make everything smaller. Yeah. No, it's actually has a lot to do with the space race because everything that you were trying to put into orbit, every gram of weight, you're trying to break the atmosphere, basically the gravitational pull of the Earth. And that's more rocket fuel and more thrust and more potential for disaster. So how do you do that? Well, you cut as much as you can of that weight. So are you going to put a computer the size of a freaking room, as big as they used to be, on a space shuttle, or can you want to try to get it smaller? You want to try to get it smaller. And so that's why we have miniaturization in tech, is because of the space race. And so who knows what other technologies will be developed or augmented or improved because of AI. You know, that's yet to be seen, but because of the power draw, that's something we're going to have to consider. If AI is going to be integrated more and more, otherwise it might just be non-viable. So we'll see. But this is the kind of stuff that Trump isn't thinking about because, again, this is long-term planning. This is long-term strategy. And one, America's not really good at that, and that's not a new thing, right? It's pretty much been since the foundation. Like we didn't really have a proper navy until like ocean going fleet until Teddy Roosevelt. We had some of that, but not nearly enough. Um, if you read about the gunboat, like the gunboats that Jefferson was so hot for, which were just a bust. It was like, we're just going to do coastal defense. It's like, nope. But yeah, we didn't even have a two fleet, Atlantic and a Pacific fleet until Roosevelt. And that was because of the Spanish American War. Because it was like, hey, we have the Philippines, we have Puerto Rico. We're getting into being an imperial power, which at first people like, man, I'm trying to think of his name. Fog brain. It's killing me. Not Walt Whitman. He wrote Huck Finn. I can't believe he's like the great American writer, and I can't remember his name. I'm drawing a blank. Yeah, someone will put it up. But anyway, he was an ardent imperialist, and then he became an anti-imperialist, American imperialist. Samuel Clemens, Mark Twain. Mark Twain, there we go. Yep. Mark Twain. You know. And That a lot of that was because, again, we always had this frontier to explore. We didn't need to be an ocean-going power. We had all this landmass that we were, we didn't close the frontier officially until 1890, and that was also the same year that our nation finally started exporting more finished products than, raw materials, you know, which is if you wanna look at that time period as an interesting parallel, if you're really a history geek, that's where Canada's going. In 10 years, that's gonna maybe less, that's gonna be Canada. We're gonna like, there's a good possibility we're gonna start buying Canadian-made goods. They're gonna go to more finished products. I don't know. I mean, it's like they absolutely have the natural resources to become a China, So we'll see. Or at least, a little China, you know. I mean, like making like it's about making stuff at scale. Can you make stuff the world needs at scale? And we can't do that. Not the way we're currently set up. And that's the thing. Though that all takes years and years and years, and it would take successive administrations to do that. That's why post World War II, we used to say politics ends at the water's edge. You have domestic things you go back and forth about, but you never go and take the other side against America internationally. That's why we used to, that's why a lot of this stuff would be when you try to say it's a national security issue, even though it's like it's not really a national security issue. But the reason they did that was so we wouldn't argue about it like we did domestic stuff. That's why the highway system, Roosevelt, the way he sold it to Congress was, well, it's a national security issue. Because again, nobody had any stomach to build it. They didn't want it. I mean, it took us to get the interstate system we have today, which, everyone's like, oh, yeah, look at all our roads and blah, blah, blah. There was no stomach for it. And the whole reason Eisenhower, how he proved that was he basically said, okay, this is what it would take to get a division across country. And I think it was ridiculous. It took something like 30 days. And people were like, oh, dear God, that's insane, So that's when we started building the US highway system. And then Nixon built the interstate system. And that was a similar kind of thing where it's like, no, we got to have this, we got to augment it, da 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 da. And that's why they're separate, is because they had to pass it as a separate thing. So Eisenhower did the US state highways, Nixon did the interstate system. But it took a long time to get that through Congress. It took decades because, again, we always have this issue, and it's just baked into democracy, and especially because you're getting elected every 2 years in the House. It's short-term stuff. So you need a president that, you know, um, you need a president that is part of this line of succession. You may differ on a few things, but on America's place in the world and where we go as a country, that's why they tend to it's like, well, they're all the same. Yeah, there's a reason for that. Is because you're trying to set the agenda. You're the chief diplomat. That's how you maintain hegemonic power. That's how that's how you can say these projects that are absolutely going to span past your even 2 terms. You push that. Because presidents are supposed to understand it's not just about you right now. It's about what's good for the country. And you do that because, you're the president. That's it. If we're going by the Roman circle of offices, there's nowhere else to go, right? Yeah, sure, you can be John Quincy Adams and you're president back in the day when that didn't really mean much. And then you go back to the House, okay, like you were president for a little bit, and now you're back in the House. Or, William Howard Taft. I was kind of hoping Obama would do this, but unfortunately, it didn't happen. Taft, after he became president, he went and became the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. How awesome would that be, Chief Justice Barack Obama? There's still hope. There's still hope. Like if we can just somehow get, you know, whatever his name is out of there, that would be like, oh, great. But that's the thing. Trump will chicken out because, again, it's bluster and bullying first, and that's not going to work. And then it's like, okay, well, then I'll come down and then like, let's do a better deal. And then they're going to say to that, then the other countries go to him and say, no, actually, we want this, this, and this. Oh, 25, 50% tariffs. And they just watch him throw a temper tantrum because it's going to get bad for him and Republicans. And they know that. I mean, these people overseas aren't stupid. They probably know more about our country and government than the people running it right now, which is kind of a scary thought, you know. But the thing that I think that we have, and the reason I say that I put a post up where I think we've lost our superpower status. But it's not coming back. I look at that. The reason I said that, and a lot of this is Trump, and again, this is not Congress. This is not MAGA. Like, this isn't, Rand Paul. This is absolutely Trump. And the big tell right now, and I'll wrap up with this, is our tourism, which is going to take a hit. Now, for those of you who don't know, I used to work in aviation. I worked sort of on that end of the hospitality industry. I was an operations manager. I worked at Washington National DCA. I worked at Philadelphia International Airport. I worked at Detroit, and I worked at LAX. That's where I finished my career up. And so I understood the industry, just being an academic and just sort of wanting to understand sort of my place and how this all worked. Picked up a few things here and there, read, study it. So, for example, up until recently, I don't know what the numbers are going to look like this year, but pre-pandemic, the number one airport for enplanements, talking about people coming in or local and then sort of transfer. The busiest airport in the world was Atlanta. Over 96 million people a year went through that airport. 96 million. Heathrow was second. I think it was like 93. So America in Atlanta had the busiest airport in the world, hands down. And our tourism dollars was over 1 trillion. 1 trillion. It's like 1.2 every year. That's every year. The hospitality industry and tourism industry it employs 20 million people in America. 20 million. I mean, you have cities like Las Vegas, every major city, Los Angeles, Florida, like cities in Florida, you name it. Like, that's where they get a bulk of their money. And the thing you got to remember about tourism, right? People want to have a little adventure, but they want it to be safe. Nobody wants to travel to a country where, you don't know if you're going to get thrown in jail. How much do you think people wanted to travel to Moscow and Russia after what they did to Brittany Grenier? Think a lot of Americans wanted to rush over to Moscow after that? Hell no. Not even close. Especially if you're going to do international travel, you're like, you know what? Maybe we'll go to Paris. Maybe we'll go to Rome. We don't need to go. We don't need to go to Moscow. I'll just look it up online. And you hear these horror stories that are continuously going on with all these detainees. And not just that, I mean, it's just how we're operating now. And you've got Gavin Newsom, who's trying to target Canadians, saying, "Hey, come to California. you know, like, we want Canadians, and that's true, and maybe they do. I'm sure they do, especially because California makes a whole bunch of money off of tourism. But one, Canadians are so pissed off at us right now, they won't buy anything that says made in America. And I don't blame them, you know, especially when we're constantly threatening them with annexation. And secondly, for all his talk, man, California doesn't control customs. That's a federal position. Same thing anywhere flying internationally into um into the US. I know. We flights coming in from Canada, they had what's called pre-clear bags, all that other stuff. I had to work that, you know? It was one of the things. I had to know those flights, and I had to go over there and made sure, and I had to literally, part of my job was going over there and standing by the scanners and making sure that the people that were doing the quote pre-clears were doing it correctly. I didn't have to do that for domestic, not at all, but I had to do that for international. For like, there were all kinds of security procedures I had to do for international flights. So if you're coming from Canada to the US, why would you risk it? And so the cancellations just from Canada, who Canadians used to make up our largest percentage of tourists from any country, which makes sense because they're our neighbor to the north, has dropped 70%. Airline bookings overall are down 25% for the year. 5% is catastrophic in the industry I used to work in. 5 is people are like, we're getting cut. 25%? Dear God, that's apocalyptic. Like, that's something you can't, like, that is COVID levels. Forget, like, they're not even dropping, like, they're not even cutting back just on flights. They're cutting back on routes. Like, oh yeah, man, like, that flight from DCA to Oklahoma City at night. Yeah, we can't afford that. Yeah, you might have to go to Dulles, or you might have to drive, 100 miles. You might have to go to Philly if you want to fly to Oklahoma City because we ain't doing it. That's the kind of stuff we're talking about. Nevada, like Las Vegas, is about to be hit hard. I mean, in the mouth, hard because of Donald Trump. Now, it's also because of some of their executives who have raised prices on parking and other amenities to try to keep, making profits, right? And if you've been to Vegas in recent years like I have, I've had to go there for business. The food's gotten worse and you pay more for it. It sucks. I'm like, you're paying even the buffets, which used to be amazing, are just kind of meh. You know, like I'm paying $80 for just like, eh. Like, okay, fantastic. And you've got executives at casinos. I think every casino is furloughing staff except for Aria and the Bellagio in Vegas right now. We're talking they've already let go of all their valet people, like, and they're letting go of other concierge services, like your gig employees that kind of work for the hotel, like the tipped employees. They're cutting all that staff, which is a huge part of that town. And what? And from what? From Trump, you know, from Donald Trump. You think he's gonna have the guts to go to Vegas and tell him like the golden age is coming soon? I don't think he's got the stomach to go to Vegas and get in a crowd, even outdoors and have that. I don't think he's gonna get the reception he thinks. Like, I think he knows he ain't gonna get the reception. Not in Vegas. No, you know. So, and that's the thing. I think what we're gonna see more of in the coming, because the thing, they're like, I'm seeing a lot of articles now that are, like, if America needs to turn this around soon or it's permanent. I don't think it's permanent, man. You know, Once I mean, that's the thing. That's the loss of this soft power. That's the loss of this we're the beacon of freedom in the world. Whether it was true or not, that's how the world perceived us. And now the world's looking at us like, "Ooh, y'all MAGA." No. Mm-mm. I mean, nobody wants to be those 2 uh, German teenage women, teenage girls that went to Hawaii and, some jerk at ICE or customs, and customs enforcement got all up in them like, "You didn't have all your hotels listed." You know? Like, so what? I did that overseas, like, I would g I used to make my hotels the day when when I landed, all the time. Because all you needed was Wi-Fi. A lot of Wi-Fi over there is free, just like it is over here. And especially if you're in a major city, you just pop on. A lot of stuff's in English. I'm like, this hotel looks good for the night. Boom. There it is. Booked. It's Hawaii. And what happened to them? Well, they got detained, they got strip searched, and then they were kicked out of the country. That's happened multiple times. Man, you think these people want to come over here? Mm-mm. Canadians have multiple reasons not to come here. You just giving them more. They're like, you know what? How about we go to Mexico? We'll go to Mexico. I'll come to California. Nah, bro. I think we'll go to Mexico. We're good. I think we go. We're good, bro. Or we'll go to Europe. Hell, we might even go to Greenland. You know, yeah. What happened to all that? Where's all that bluster? Oh, we gonna annex Greenland. We're gonna annex Greenland. Yeah. As soon as Denmark, I think it was Denmark, who said, "Oh no, the hell you not." Uh-uh. You ain't doing that. Okay. Yeah, you don't hear too much about Greenland no more, do you? Or Panama or none of that. Nope. You just hear about what China. Oh, you know, even in things that he like. So, like, even in things he should just shut the hell up about. You know, like India and Pakistan have averted a war, right? They said, "All right, man, we got to messing around. Let's just knock the foolishness off, bro." Which is great because it's like, whew, that's a volatile area of the world. For those of you who don't know, India and Pakistan do not like each other, like not even a little bit. And a lot of times the U.S. would step in like, hey, calm down, take it down a notch. We don't want to get because y'all are nuclear powers. Let's not get hasty, okay? But you know, this time, no. But then they sort it out, and what happens? Trump comes in and goes, "Oh, yeah, yeah, I helped out with that." And made India mad, like, "No, you didn't. You didn't help out with nothing." It was like, "We did this, fool." Like, oh my God. It's just like, dude, can you just not piss off every country in the world? Oh, and to wrap up, like they basically had an agreement with Iran and said, "Yeah, you could do nuclear enrichment." And Iran's like, "Are you sure?" I'm like, yeah, I guess it's like, I mean, I thought that was your whole deal. You didn't want us. Are you sure you're going to let us do nuclear enrichment? So Iran can apparently do nuclear enrichment now. You can't make this up, man. Like, you know, it's just like, are you purposely doing things wrong? So yeah, our punk ass POTUS has done what punk ass people do, has chickened out. I expect to see him golfing more, complaining more on True Social, you know, and talking about how unfair things are and how Biden's to blame for everything. And that's pretty much where we're going to go. So we're going to have a lot more Taco Tuesdays. We haven't even touched the domestic front. We haven't even touched civil rights. We haven't even touched, like, you know, we haven't even touched what's happening with farmers. We haven't touched all the things that are going on where he's chickened out at. And in fact, I think he's going to chicken out of his whole job at some point. You know. Anyway, I appreciate y'all tuning in for the first Taco Tuesday. We're going to try to do these every Tuesday until Trump's out of office, or he, stops not being a punk. But I think he will be. Anyway, guys, I appreciate y'all. Y'all have a good day. Thanks again for tuning in to the first ever Taco Tuesday. Y'all have a good one. Bye-bye.